right, we are live on Facebook, and this is our Wednesday night Bible study for Wesconnett and for all the others that join in with us. A few announcements before we begin our study tonight. Continue to keep Robert Toland in your prayers. He had back surgery, but I hear he's doing well. Betty said that he's doing really good, so we want to keep him in our prayers. Keep Hazel in your prayers. Her stepson Charles passed away recently, and she's having a difficult time. Keep Doris Shepherd in your prayers, as she's been having a difficult time with the loss of her daughter a few weeks ago. Also, Cindy is doing really good. That's my wife. Cindy is doing great with her recovery from knee replacement surgery, and we really do appreciate everything that everyone has been doing for us, and giving us meals and providing things for us and helping us out. We really do appreciate that so much. Great to have a Christian family that helps you out all the time. We are in 1 Timothy chapter 3 tonight. 1 Timothy chapter 3. And we're going to be looking at the qualifications of elders and deacons. We'll also be mentioning the wives. That will also be in this, the qualification of their wives. And again, all of this centers in on verse 15. And we've been studying this with last week, dealing with the church and organization of the church. This week centers around the context verse of chapter 3, verse 15. And that one reads, "But if I am delayed, I write so that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth." And these elders would be elders even outside of the worship assembly. They don't stop being elders when the worship assembly ends, and they don't start being elders once the worship assembly ends. Same with the deacons. This would be outside. And so last week, chapter 2 also would apply that women are, the role of women there in the church is going to be consistent, not just on Sunday morning worship and not just on Sunday night, but that would include Wednesday night and vacation Bible schools and gospel meetings, and anytime the church comes together and the church meets as a church, and it is designed and fits into the idea of serving the Lord. Then we talked about, and we talked about the reason why. But here in chapter 3, we start with verse 1. This is a faithful saying. What is? What he just talked about? No, what he's going to be talking about. He wants to emphasize to Timothy, here's the faithful saying: if a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. A good work. If a man, and this is a male, remember last week we talked about that there were two words that are two Greek words that have been translated men. One is the Greek word anthropos, which means mankind, and that really would, a better translation, I guess you could say, would be either mankind or would be to say people, all humans. But the other Greek word is aner, and aner is the male. And here he's talking about that if a male desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. So this is a man, it is not a woman that is going to be discussed as in the qualifications of an elder or deacon. But here in particular, man desires. It's okay to desire the position. It's not desiring, you're not saying that you want control and you want to be, the head of the church or anything. It's talking about desiring that position, wanting to be a leader in the church. And we've also need to say that he must desire. If it's conditional. If a man desires the position of a bishop, meaning if he doesn't desire, then he shouldn't be in the position of being a bishop. there are some that feel that they can pressure, that maybe they need to pressure a man to be an elder, and that if they pressure him and he just says, all right, I'll give in and I'll be an elder, and I don't really want it, that is good. And it says, no, the man must want to be an elder in the church. And we need to teach our young people, our even from kids through teenagers into young adults, our young males, that they need to design their life. Maybe that they should one day desire to be an elder in the church if they come across and they fall into these qualifications that we're going to talk about. The word bishop here would also include an elder, overseer, pastor, shepherd. These are all names for bishop, and these are all used. And shepherd, overseer, but the word literally means overseer, one that oversees the church. Now, verse 2. Now he gets into the qualifications of an elder, of a bishop. And we're going to take each one of these qualifications and look at them and define them so that we understand what he's talking about, what Paul's talking about, so that we as the church, when we look for men to be leaders, those leaders must follow, those men must be what Paul says. And that's what he says. He says a bishop then must be. So he's going to be talking about these things, these qualifications that must be in each of these, into a man, in a man that desires to be an elder. And these men must have all of these qualifications. You can't go through and say, well, all right, we'll just throw out one of the qualifications. Well, which one are you going to throw out? Which one are you not going to? Are we going to, throw out good behavior, or temperate, or the husband of one wife? I mean, when he says must be, he says the following qualifications must be, and this is present tense. They must have these qualifications at the time that they are appointed or as they are an elder. And we'll look through these. First of all, he says blameless. That's the first qualification. And the word blameless does not mean sinlessly perfect. Okay? We want to make that clear, that this can, and what the word literally means is that cannot be laid hold of, not open to censure. That is, there is nothing that you can pin on this particular man. In any of the things that he's done, yes, this man has made mistakes in his life and has sinned. The Bible says clearly in Romans chapter 3, verse 23, that all have sinned and come to the and fallen short of the glory of God. I almost messed that up. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Everyone has sinned, including the men that become elders. They have sinned, but there's not a big major sin that's weighing heavy over them that they would be considered, that you could lay on their charge. You couldn't think of anything huge that would say, well, they're angry all the time, or they robbed a bank yesterday, or whatever the case might be. Next, here's the big one, and a lot of questions that probably, but let's go through this. And if you have questions about that, let me know. If we need to go back to it next week, we will. And that is the qualification, the husband of one wife. I'm not sure. I think I might have disconnected there for just a second. If I did, I apologize. I'm not sure what's going on here, but the husband of one wife. Paul does not say that an elder must be married only once, nor does it say an elder cannot remarry. So we're going to look at this. We're going to look at this, and first of all, we definitely, with this, saying the husband of one wife, we definitely now know, again, it is reiterated for us that this must be a male, that women cannot be elders in the church because women cannot be husbands of one wife. They cannot be a husband. Only a man can be a husband. Let's look at some things about this, some passages that might help us understand this. The difficulty with this, that people have had with this passage, have asked two questions. They've asked, maybe many other questions, but they've said, well, an elder must be only married once. Well, that's not what the passage says. That's not what the verse says. It doesn't say, and there are Greek words that Paul easily could have used if that were the case. He says the husband of one wife. He does not say the husband of only one wife, or that only has lived only with one, been with one wife. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 39, kind of to help us with this is talking about a wife's side. On the wife's side, a widow. A wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives, but if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. This would also apply to the man. So you could say a husband is bound by the law as long as his wife lives, but if his wife dies, he is at liberty to be married to whom he wishes, only in the Lord. So, yes, if a man has a wife and that wife dies and he remarries, then he is still the husband of one wife. Again, if a man's wife dies and he becomes a widower, the present tense force of being the husband of one wife would seem to exclude him from being qualified for the eldership. And what I mean by that is that phrase must be is in present tense, so he must be the husband of one wife. He must be married. What about a man who is divorced and remarried? This is a question that comes up quite often. Many people have asked me this. Well, let's look again at the phrase. If the phrase, the husband of one wife, does not mean having been married only once in his life, which it doesn't, that would seem to admit the possibility that a man who has been divorced and is remarried to one wife could be eligible. What I'm saying is that it says the husband of one wife, not that is married, has been married only once in his lifetime. That's not what the verse says. That is a total different kind of understanding of this verse and a total different definition for this verse. He is talking about at that time. And Matthew 19:9 gives us exactly how that this whole situation can happen. And Jesus says, and I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. And whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. It would still be the case that a man who divorced his wife because of sexual infidelity and married another woman would or could be the husband of one wife. And the same thing, we probably will just read through and won't really mention much when we get to deacons. It's the same thing for a deacon. And it says that down in verse number 12, let deacons be the husbands of one wife. It's the same phrase that's used for elders that's used for deacons. So the idea of what is being discussed here with this phrase, husband of one wife, is that if, the ideal situation Jesus had was that it is one man, one woman for life. And that would be the most ideal situation, for a man becoming an elder. But a man can also be an elder if his first wife died and he remarried, and he is still because even Jesus was, kind of pushed by the Sadducees to say, you got all this man, this woman that's been married to all these different men, and who is she married to? And it says that, that Jesus said that there's not marriage in heaven, that the moment of death, going back to 1 Corinthians 7:39, that they're bound by the law as long as they are married. Romans chapter 7 also talks about this, uses marriage as an illustration to talk about the old and the new law. All right. Now, so we have a man that has been married, his wife dies, he remarries, and a scriptural marriage is what we're talking about. We're talking about a scriptural marriage, and that man can be, and still is, the husband of one wife. Same as a man is married, his wife leaves him, no fault of his own. He is the innocent party, she's the guilty, commits adultery. He remarries, again, scripturally. That's what only in the Lord, I believe, means, is scripturally. Then he, once again, he is still the husband of one wife, not two. because, again, the exception clause that Jesus sets out in Matthew chapter 19, verse 9. All right, there might be questions on that. Go ahead and you can message me those if you'd like, and we'll walk through those and discuss those. Now, the next word is temperate. Now, we sometimes think of temperate as meaning that he has the ability to hold his temper. Yes, but the word actually means sober, abstaining from wine. That's what the word actually means in the Greek. When I look it up in the Greek lexicon and I figure out, and that it means to abstain, to be temperate from, to abstain from, or to control oneself from drinking alcohol. And so, therefore, an elder must be one that does not drink alcohol, abstains from it. He must be sober-minded. Maybe some other translations might use the phrase self-controlled. And so, but sober-minded also means curbing one's desires and impulses. This man, this one that desires to be an elder, in order for them to be an elder, for him to be an elder, must be in control of his desires and his impulses. He must be self-controlled. And then it goes on and says of good behavior, a man living with decorum, a well-ordered life. He is in control of his life. He is good. He is honest with his finances and everything else. And we'll look more about that in just a moment. Hospitable. A man must be hospitable, generous to guests, loving strangers. He must be able to teach. This phrase, able to teach, not necessarily always teach in a Bible class. Sometimes we think, well, he must be always teaching a Bible class. That's what able to teach means. No, he must be able, yes, maybe to teach a Bible class, to teach others. But mainly what it means, this phrase, is a man who is apt and skillful in teaching the doctrine of Christ. That's the important part of this. Not necessarily that he is always teaching a Bible class or that is teaching a Bible class. He is able to teach the lost about Jesus. That's essential. If an elder can't teach the lost and does not have a skillful understanding of the doctrine of Jesus Christ, then he cannot be an elder. Now, let's look at verse 3. 1 Timothy 3:3, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous. Not given to wine means not addicted to wine, not a drunkard. Remember in the previous verse, Paul tells Timothy that men must be temperate, which means sober, abstaining from wine. A man must not be addicted to something that can take control over him. That's the essence of not given to wine, not addicted to it. That is also in the meaning sober-minded and of good behavior. That you're in control of your behavior and of yourself, of your mind, of your physical self. You can't be addicted to drugs or anything. And so that's what he says there. So he goes on, he says, can't be in control of anything. Nothing can be in control of him. And that, we already looked at the words temperate, which means that he needs to abstain from wine. Next phrase is not violent, not abuser, not ready with a blow, not contentious, not a quarrelsome person, not physically violent. Not, every time that someone maybe cuts them off in traffic or maybe says something to them at the mall that they're ready to fight and they're ready to fist fight. It's not the idea of standing up for your rights. That's different. But this is someone that's physically wants to, just destroy people. All they want to do is, someone does something, they just want to beat them up physically. And he says not violent, but gentle. Now, I did skip a phrase, and I'm going to be looking at that in just a moment. That's greedy for money. We're going to be putting that down with not covetous in here in just a moment. Gentle, not violent, but gentle. Equitable, fair, mild, gentle. So someone that is physically gentle, mentally and spiritually could be included in that as well. Not quarrelsome. Now you might think, well, this is the same word as violent, isn't it? No, it's a little bit different. Not quarrelsome means abstaining from like a fighting argument, like a verbal argument, and that is causing an argument. You are, this person, this man, is not one that easily starts an argument or looks for an argument or loves arguing, loves fighting with words. The one that, will maybe bring and again, it's not dealing with, standing up for the word and not preaching the word and not being vigilant for the word, but this is someone just goes out there and just wants to argue about everything. Not necessarily just the Bible, but every little thing that they want to argue about. Maybe they want to argue about politics, or maybe they want to always argue about the sports teams, or maybe they want to always argue about everything. Just always quarrelsome in their life. This is not a qualification that an elder should have. Now, the other phrase is the phrase that I skipped in this last one: not greedy for money, not covetous. They're about the same thing. This is not loving money, not greedy for filthy or evil money, not desiring money over God. That's in essence what we're talking about. Someone that doesn't desire money over God and being with God. That is not out for money over being faithful to God. All right, chapter 3, verse 4. Little Cowboys for you. All right. One who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. The phrase "one who rules his own house well." The word "rule" means to be over, to superintend, to preside over. So this man must be the one that presides over and has control over, presides over his own house. And it says well, that is rightly, so that there is no room for blame. The father has led the family in the right direction and has control over their spiritual direction in life. So this is someone that, the mother's responsibility is not to rule the house, rule over the house. It is the man's responsibility. And so if a man, you have a household and the woman's ruling over the household and she's the one that's leading and the man's in submission to her in the household, then he's not qualified to be an elder. Essence is what it's saying. And this is not an idea of lording over or ruling with an iron fist or being abusive in any way. This is dealing with being loving and being caring. And as we go on here, having his children in submission with all reverence. I saw that Ellie is on. So Ellie, you got to remember to be submissive to your daddy and with all reverence. Elder, if you ever, I'm just kidding. She is. We have really good kids. Ellie and what's the other name? Oh yeah, Hayden. Couple things here. First of all, elders must have children. It says having his children in submission. Obviously he has to have children. So this is one or more. Just because the word in this is plural does not mean the man must have more than one. We find there's other cases. Sarah talks about having children. She only had one child. So, someone asks you and you only have one child, saying, well, how many children do you have? Well, I don't have any children. Well, no, you say, well, I have one. What's your children? As someone, if you were on a boat and it was sinking and the captain said, women and children first, and you would say, well, I only have one child, so I can't get on. Women with their children, or whatever. You understand, right? But submission means obedience. The children must obey their parents. In today's society, sometimes the parents are obeying the children. That is not the way that God designed it. In Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 1, it says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. This is what must be done. Now it goes on and tells that, fathers not to provoke your children to wrath or to anger, and so forth and so on. But this is that they are in submission, they obey. When you tell them to do something, they do it. Now I know that there are times that children get a little rambunctious, that maybe they'll say no, but the overall thing is that they are in submission to what you say. They're reverent. This is dignity, gravity, honor, purity. It is sometimes disheartening to hear children call their parents, and these are children at home, young children, calling their parents by their first name. I think that doesn't show reverence in our society today for their parents. I still call my father, I'll call him and say, hey, Dad, and my mom, and I still have, that reverence and dignity for my parents, even though I've been out of the house for, 30 years or so. And my children still call me Dad or Daddy, and they call their mother Mommy or Mom. So that shows reverence, and it shows honor, that you honor your parents. All the elders' children must be in submission to him under his house. Once the children have left the house and no longer under his house rule, they are no longer in submission to his rules. And so that's, what my children, once they get married and they establish their own household, I can't go and say, all right, you need to do this, you need to be, and I go over to their house, wash the dishes. That's different. They have set up their own house. We'll talk more about that as we go along. He says the reason for this in verse 5. For if a man does not know how to rule, that is, control, to oversee his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? If his own family is running over him and they are controlling him, then that same thing is going to happen in the church. The church is going to run all over him. He can't rule. He cannot, be the one to preside over, to be over the church if they're going to run all over him. And so that's what he says there. In verse 6, not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride, he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. Not a novice means that he's not a new convert, newly planted. He is not to be a recently converted Christian. He must have had time to develop and grow as a follower of God. Or else how could he shepherd a congregation if he doesn't even know anything about the church? He doesn't know the people in the congregation. He could be led away, the verse says, into pride, being puffed up with pride and falling into the same condemnation as the devil. In verse 7, it says, moreover, he must have a good testimony among those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. A good testimony, it is, and this is in an ethical sense, or testimony concerning one's character. People in the world, that's the idea of among those who are outside the church, people in the world must look to this man as one who is honest and trustworthy. If he is not, how can they in the world trust him when he says anything about being godly? If he is dishonest in his affairs and he comes to him, I want to tell you about Jesus, then they'll have the same idea about him that they do about what he's saying. So he's got to be trustworthy. He has a good testimony. People, you go to his neighbors, to the people at his work site, whatever, and they say, oh yeah, so-and-so, oh, he's a great guy. He is so honest, we can trust him with anything and everything. Next phrase is the snare of the devil. The allurements to sin by which the devil holds one bound. The man who does not have a good reputation in the world could bring that same lifestyle into his leadership. Verse 8, now we get into the deacons. He talked about here in the first 7 verses dealing with the qualifications of the bishop or the elders or the overseer or the shepherds. He says, likewise means in a similar manner, deacons must be reverent, not double-tongued, not given to much wine, not greedy for money. The word deacons, this is a special office. Now the word is similar. It is diakonos, which means servant, but this is a special servant. This is an office or a special word. While we are all servants of God, this is one who, by virtue of the office assigned him by the church, cares for the poor and has charge of and distributes to the needs of the work of the church. This is someone that's specifically placed in charge of a specific work that they do. And here are the qualifications. He must be, again, just like what was said about the elder, it is present tense. It must be right then. It cannot be something that they grow into or that they become later on. Oh, just give that person time. They'll eventually be whatever, one of these things. They'll eventually not be greedy for money. No, that they must be at that time that they are appointed to be a deacon. They must have these qualifications. First of all, reverent. Same as what was said about the elder, honorable in their character. Not double-tongued. This is someone that is not saying one thing with one person and another thing with someone else. We sometimes will call this person like two-faced. This is, the Bible says, not that double-tongued. They say one thing to one person and then they say something totally opposite or different to someone else. You can't do that. And be someone that's trusted. Paul goes on and says, not given to much wine. This, here's another phrase that is, I guess, has caused some difficulty, but let's walk through it. And if you have questions afterwards, go ahead and message me those, and we'll talk about them. Literally, the phrase means not to be occupied with much wine. What is Paul saying? Is he saying it is okay for a deacon to drink some wine, but not a lot of it? And what is some as opposed to much? How do we come to that conclusion? How do we come to the idea, or where do you cross the line? What is some, what is a little bit, and what is too much there? Well, without even thinking of worrying about that, let's look at two passages in the scriptures, one from the Old Testament, one from the New Testament, and let's ask a question about it. In Ecclesiastes, all right, in the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes chapter 7, in verse 17, Solomon writes at the very beginning of that, says, do not be overly wicked. And I want you to think about that for a moment. Does Solomon mean that we can be moderately wicked? Does Solomon mean that we can be just a little bit wicked? Of course not. That's not his point in that verse. We cannot be wicked at all. He's discussing a particular instance. In 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 4, we come now to the New Testament. Peter writes, in regard to these, they think it strange that you do not run with them in the same flood. Now, flood, the word flood means excess or abundance of dispensation. That is, the word dispensation means an abandoned, riotous life, speaking evil of you. So if we look at this, is Peter giving Christians the right to practice a little bit of dispensation? Or as the King James says, riot? A little bit of riotous life? Of course not. He is condemning, of course, in the verses before that in 1 Peter chapter 4, he deals with all sorts of different types of sin. To say that a deacon can drink in moderation and not in excess, use this verse is inconsistent. I want you to notice the following. What we just got done talking about with the elders in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 2 through 3. And I want to bring out these different groups of individuals that actually, I believe that, yes, it's Paul that talks about all of these and what he says about drinking alcohol. He says to elders in 1 Timothy 3, 2 through 3, he says, and again, if we're following the logic, if we're following the logic that this means, in this verse, not given to much wine means that a deacon can drink a little bit. Let's place these things, that phrase, and let's see if this works. Elders are told to abstain, to not even be near it. Okay, so they're abstaining from it. The deacons then, we see if we're to be consistent in this drink in moderation, and not to excess idea, Paul's telling them to drink moderately in 1 Timothy 3:8. But then we haven't gotten to the verse. In verse 11, he says to wives to abstain from drinking any alcohol. Then in Titus chapter 2, verse 2, he tells aged men, older men, that they are to abstain from drinking alcohol, but then tells older women that they can drink moderately. Does that really make sense? Is that consistent? Of course not. Of course, he's not telling elders that they can't drink, and elders can drink, and the wives of the deacons can't drink, but their husbands can drink. That doesn't make any sense. So it has to be something else. Of course, Paul was not telling Timothy that certain ones could drink alcohol moderately while others could not. In the view of the Bible, being consistent, much wine must be a loose form of speech intended to express complete restraint in the use of wine. So there is in no way is he giving any leniency to a deacon and then condemning the wives, or saying the wives can't do it of the deacons, and the elders can't do it, and the older men can't do it, but the older women can. Again, so it has there's something else, and obviously we've got to take it, the whole scriptures, everything together, and we understand that as I read just a moment ago, this last statement, in view of the Bible being consistent, much wine must be a loose form of speech intended to express complete restraint in the use of wine. It comes from Apologetics Press. If you want to look that up, you can look at one of their articles about that. Now, again, about the deacons, as he mentioned about the elders, not greedy for money. Greedy means eager for base gain, greedy for filthy money. It doesn't mean that they can't have a job or they can't make money and they can't get raises at their job and earn overtime or other things, but that can't be their big desire. They cannot have a desire for money over God and godliness. All right, verse 9. Paul goes on, holding the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience. Holding the mystery of the faith, Christian truth is what the faith is, as hidden from ungodly men. Not that they are purposely hiding the truth. That's not what Paul's telling them, to hold the truth away from ungodly. But that the ungodly don't know the truth as of yet. So they hold this teaching that hasn't been revealed to every person, maybe the person down the street, to ungodly people. They haven't responded to him. It says, with pure conscience, free from any guilt. Next, in verse 10, about the deacons, he says, but let these also first be tested. Then let them serve as deacons, being found blameless. First be tested. It is to see whether a thing is genuine or not. As like a metal. You test a metal to see if it is purely gold. There's something called fool's gold. It looks like gold. It maybe feels like gold, but when you test it and you really find out, you realize that it's not gold. There's things that look like gold, feel like gold, and you test it, it is gold. That's what that word comes from. It means to examine or to scrutinize. Usually a deacon is someone younger in age and is yet to be proven to be able to do the work assigned to him. You must not just appoint a man a deacon and say, well, we just don't know what you can do yet, and we'll assign that to you later. You come in, that's a lot. It's not just an office to hold, like you're elected to it, and you don't do anything. You don't know what. You are assigned a specific work, something that you are serving. It's not just you're just given a title because, oh, well, he's been here for 5 years and he has children, he has all these other qualifications. We don't know how we're going to use him, but we'll just say that he's a deacon now. No, we as elders, when they appoint deacons, must appoint them to a certain responsibility. That's the idea there. Being found blameless. The proof that is also in the man being without blame. That is nothing you can hold to them over their head or something, some big sin maybe everyone knows that kind of destroys their influence. All right, verse 11, he switches a little bit here in this verse. And he says, likewise, their wives must be reverent, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. The word their, T-H-E-I-R, their wives, this is referring to deacons, and I believe also is referring to the wives of elders. I think that he's talking about both. He says a bishop in verse 1, he says deacons in verse 8, and then he talks about their wives. I think that he's talking about elders and deacons' wives. These are the qualifications. When it says wives, he separates wives from deacons, thus saying a woman cannot be a deacon. And in the next verse, you'll see that even clearer. He says that the wives must be reverent. The wives of elders and deacons must have an honorable character. They must not be slanderers, that is, prone to talk falsely about someone, accuse someone of falsehoods, talk negatively or evil about someone. They must be temperate. Here's that word again, the same that was used for elders back up in verse 2. And it says that an elder must be temperate. A bishop must be temperate. Temperate means abstaining from wine. An elder's wife and a deacon's wife must abstain from alcohol. Must be sober-minded, clear, and faithful in all things. There must not be anything that they are unfaithful or unrighteous in. They must be honest in their dealings. Maybe if they work outside the home, they must be honest at work. People must respect them, and they must have a good report. Then verse 12, he goes back to deacons. He says, let deacons be the husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their own houses well. Husbands of one wife. Again, same as above, as we talked about with the elders in the previous verses. These deacons in the specific office are men. They cannot be women. There are some churches out there that are appointing women as deacons into a specific office of deacons when they are not qualified. It says, back up to verse 8, must be. They must have these qualifications, like the elder must have these qualifications. A deacon is the only one, he is the one that can only be a husband of one wife. A male, can only be the husband of one wife. A woman cannot be the husband of one wife. Ruling their children. That again, they must have children and be the ruler or in control over them and their own house as well, that is ruling over or presiding over their houses well. In verse 13, for those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a good standing and a great boldness in the faith which is in Christ Jesus. There is much praise given to deacons who serve the church, and should be. We should be thankful for our deacons in our congregation. And we have 3 great deacons at Wesconnett. 3 men that are faithful to the word, that are strong, and they go and they do the work of the Lord, and they're active. I mean, it's really, these are quality men, and you can look at their example and the things that they do for the church, for the congregation, as fitting exactly into the scriptures here, what a deacon must do. They take their responsibilities seriously, and they work hard at those responsibilities. And I am grateful for the deacons that we have at Wesconnett. Verse 14, these things I write to you, though I hope to come to you shortly. Paul wrote this ahead of his coming, so that Timothy could teach the church how to be organized. In Titus, he says to Titus, the true son in our common faith. He says in verse 5, for this reason I left you in Crete, that you should set in order the things that are lacking. And so Timothy is being here, just like Titus was left in Crete, and he writes him a letter and tells him how to organize. He's written a letter to Timothy and tells Timothy how the church must be organized. And verse 15 again is our chapter 2 and chapter 3's context verse. He says, but if I am delayed, I write so that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. The phrase conduct yourselves means to behave oneself, live as the church. And as I said last week, this is not talking about, the kids need, this is talking about that the kids shouldn't run in the church building. This is talking about the church, the people. It's not talking about the building. This is talking about the people. This is talking about the worship. This is talking about the organization, how the men are overseers and they do these good works. House of God means family or household of God. That shows you that it's talking about the people, not the building. Living God. God is living and active in the lives of the church. He's not dead. He's not gone. He is not retired and gone off somewhere. He is active and living. It says that, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. The truth is as taught in the Christian religion, respecting God and the execution of his purposes through Christ. So it's talking about the truth. And the church is the pillar. The pillar is a prop or support system. You see pillars on buildings and you see pillars inside of buildings and it helps support the building. He says the ground, that is like a foundation, is the base, the stay, the prop, another support. So he says, in essence, he says, I write to you that know how you ought to conduct yourselves in the house of God, which is the church of the living God. And so this church, the church to us, we are the pillar, we are the support, and we are the base of the truth. We have the truth, and we can go out and we must spread the truth to the lost and the dying. And finally, in verse 16, he says, and without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. Now he's going to describe Christ. He says, God was manifested in the flesh. Well, who is that? That's Jesus Christ. In John 1:14, John 1:1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So, and verse 14 tells us the Word is Christ. Verse 14 says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So Paul is referring here that God was manifested in the flesh. Jesus came, justified in the Spirit, seen by angels, preached among the Gentiles. We see that Paul was doing that, and it was done by Peter in Acts chapter 10. Believed on in the world. The world believed. There were many people that believed on Christ. Even people into the Sanhedrin believed. You have Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea that were members of the Sanhedrin that believed on Christ and received up in glory. Jesus ascended into heaven in Acts 1 verse 9. Gives you kind of a an overview that Jesus came to this earth. He lived a life. He died on the cross. All of this gospel was preached to not only the Jews, but also to the Gentiles. The world believed on him. And finally, then he was received back up into heaven to sit at the right hand of the throne of God. Now, I know I went through a lot of stuff tonight on chapter 3, the qualifications of elders and deacons. If you wrote something down or have a question about that, go ahead and message me, and I'll try to remember I'll write that down, and we'll look at that next week. I didn't get any messages or any questions about last week. I guess that means I did a great job. Usually that's the way I take it. When I don't get a question, I did a great job. No. You still might have some confusion over chapter 2, or if you didn't get to see our lesson on chapter 2 and you read through it and you do have some questions, go ahead and send those to me. Would love to look through that and answer that for you. So next time we're going to talk about chapter 4 in 1 Timothy. Once again, our announcements, as I talked about at the beginning, keep Brother Robert Tolan in your prayers, as he had back surgery, but he's doing well. Hazel's stepson Charles passed away suddenly last week, and my wife Cindy is doing great after her knee replacement surgery. And remember any of the others that we have on our prayer list this past Sunday. All right, if you will, we're going to have a prayer together, and then we're going to end. Dear Heavenly Father, we're so grateful to you for this opportunity we have to study a portion of your word. We pray for those that we have mentioned, Brother Robert Tolan, that we continue to be with him in his recovery, and be with Hazel, and be with Doris Shepard and others that have lost loved ones. Be with those that are sick and ailing tonight, that need you and need our prayers for them. We also are continually grateful for the church that meets here at Wesconnett, and we ask that you bless the church all over the world and keep the church strong and faithful to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, y'all have a great night. Don't forget Sunday, 9 a.m. for those that are 60 and over. If you're under 60, at 10:30. God bless and have a great night.